Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some music production tips and techniques while recreating Jimin's Like Crazy. I'm going to start off by showcasing my recreated version, compare it to the original, and then afterwards walk you through the whole production process. All right, so let's dive right in. So let's start by focusing in on the drums. So here I have an Ableton Live drum rack selected with just a kick, hi-hat, and snare. Now, the original has this cool synthwave retro type of vibe to it. So immediately my brain's thinking, all right, let's go for some, vintage drum machine type of sound. So I'm thinking Linn drum, either 909 snares and things like that. So that kind of helps me start where to go for my sound selection, which is a big part of producing music. So here I have my kick and hi-hat pattern as well as the snares. You notice that the hi-hats here are a lot darker in color, and then we have this one hi-hat that's just a little bit brighter than the rest. Well, that's because I'm using the velocity to accent this one note here to actually give it a unique sense of rhythm. For instance, if we lower that just by holding the command and dragging it down to give it a darker shade of color, that's lowering the velocity. And it just seems a bit stiff. But as we hold command and raise the velocity, we're going to accent that one note. So having that one hit accent, it gives that taka 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 taka, and that actually changes the groove a little bit, gives it a little bit more life. So in order to do that, I want to make sure on that hi-hat sample, I head over here to the velocity versus volume knob, and I've got it about 21%. The more value you give it, the more the changes of velocity that you make have an impact on the overall volume. So I thought that was a good place there. Then I've got an EQ on that hi-hat just to kind of make it less bright, a lot more warmer. And then once I've got the kick and snare pattern and hi-hats filled in, I'm going to go ahead and place a drum bus directly onto that drum rack. Now, I'm really not doing a lot of drive, not a lot of crunch, and I'm using the transient shaper to get more body, more sustain from the kick, snare, and the hi-hat. But also, I noticed when I compared to the reference, I wanted a little bit more bottom end or just more beef to the body of overall. So that's what I'm using the boom knob for here. And then right along here, I've got an EQ8 just so I can kind of balance this out in context of the rest of the mix. So I'm just boosting a little bit more bottom end here and taking some low mid and high mids as well. And then I had a saturator here, but actually set to digital clip mode. And I'm purposely using digital clip as a way to kind of eliminate some of the transients of the drums and kind of just squash the kick, snare, and the hi-hat together, sandwich them together. So just a bit more controlled in the dynamics and just get that saturation on those drum sounds. So here's the drums without the drum bus, EQ, and saturator. Okay, and then right along that, I have a loop. And so oftentimes, just to add a bit texture, sometimes I create a pattern just like this, kick, snare, and hi-hat, but I can't help but feel like there's something missing. There's a texture missing. So oftentimes, if I have that feeling, I would just accompany my drums with a loop. And I'll either just draw in the pattern with a drum loop, meaning I would cut it up and make sure that it hits the pattern. Or in this case, we have the drum loop just playing, but I put a gate on it and have the drum rack trigger that gate. So the gate is placed on that loop, and then I make sure that the sidechain source of that gate is the drums, which is the title for my Ableton Live drum rack track. So that means that every time the kick and the snare and the hi-hat play, that will allow the loop to be heard. This is without the loop. It just adds that subtlety to it that really just goes a long way. It's those kind of decisions when you compound them throughout the production of your tracks that start to really make things feel more glued and just more polished and pro. And I got a separate track here just for the tom fills. I didn't want to include them in the drum rack, meaning drag and drop samples in the rack here. So I went ahead and just had the separate track for the tom fills so that I can place a reverb directly on them and just treat them differently. Really quick, I just want to give you the heads up that I've put together a bunch of templates, including vocal chains, effects, sounds, construction kits, loops, and samples that you can use in your projects absolutely free. This is also going to include a lot of the sessions that of songs that I've broken down on this channel. So you want access to that? Simply visit beatacademy.com/pack or just click the link below in the description box to get access to this. And even if you're not using Ableton Live, there are plenty of resources that you can access from this link. So click the link below or visit beatacademy.com/pack. All right, let's jump right back in. So this is just really just placing the tom samples and following along with the pattern and the fill that I'm looking for, and then placing a big room reverb preset directly right onto this drum rack. Now what I'll do is I'll accent my last two hips with an 808 clap. And now we have another track on the bottom, and I decided, you know what, let me also accentuate that tom fill by using another hi-hat track with a vocoder on it set to the noise and opening up the release. So this is what that looks like. So we have a hi-hat sample, and the hi-hat pattern is just playing straight 16th notes. Accenting, I just copied the hi-hat pattern from the drum rack onto here. But the trick is placing the Ableton Live vocoder directly onto the sample. Set to noise. And what's cool is then you can start to automate the release. So anytime that the release is open, you get more of the sustain of that noise. So that's even a cool way to open and close that release to create unique patterns that you can layer with your drums. Now, for the bass, just listening into the reference, there was this like almost this FM-ish type of sound, almost like a slap bass as well. Couldn't really put my finger on it. At first, initially, I thought, well, it's got this metallic type of sound. I think that's a good way of putting it, like a metallic type of sound to it. So I thought, all right, we could probably go with like a sawtooth, detune another oscillator, and then I wasn't really happy with that. So I go, okay, if it's metallic, then FM synthesis is really going to be a great option to kind of get that metallic feel from your synthesis. So if you're not using Ableton Live, you're following along on another DAW, any FM synthesis plugin that you might have will do the job. So in this case, I'm using Ableton Live's operator, or if you have FM8, anything like that, you can get the same results. So oscillator 1 is set to a sine wave, and the same thing for oscillator 2. Now, the way this works is that FM synthesis is really using the other oscillators to modulate one another. So I'm just going to increase the level or the volume of oscillator B because it affects the result or modulates oscillator A. All right, now let's go ahead and increase the volume of oscillator B. And I'm going to move the chorus over. And that's that kind of metallic, or I would say maybe a PVC pipe-ish type of sound. And that's what we're going for here. Let's increase a little bit of oscillator C. That's cool there. And then just bringing the release down a little bit. And then what I'm going to do next is just create another MIDI track, copy the same exact MIDI pattern, and we'll go with a wavetable here. And this is going to be our sub bass, right? So I'll leave this at our sine wave here, and this will play the same exact part. I want to make sure that I set it from polyphonic to monophonic so we're not getting any overlaps with the notes, and bring the release down a little bit so those notes don't linger. All right, so this will be our sub bass. Let me go ahead and label that sub. And that means in the operator, what we're going to do is I'm going to go get our EQ8 and just shave off some of the low end. And I want to kind of spread this out a little bit. So we're going to use our chorus plugin here in Ableton Live, give it a little bit of spread. Now, I still want those first initial 2 notes, that bass line, to be accented a little more. And in my mind, and when I listen to the reference, I think, man, why don't I just layer it with another bass, but an actual electric bass and set to a slap mode? So here I'm using Moto Bass for that. I'm going to be using just the studio bass, but what's different is the play style we're going to set over to the slap. And what I'm going to do is just grab the MIDI from our first original bass line, holding the Option key, dragging that down so it copies that. Now it's just too low, so I'm going to hit Command A to select all the notes and hold Shift and hit the arrow key up. That shifts the whole riff an octave higher. Okay, so I'll probably just take these first 2 notes. I just want to accent those first 2 notes, so I'll just take that out and then take this part out as well. All right, now let's focus in on creating the pads. Now, this is a typical pad sound that I'm trying to recreate that you can find in a lot of synth waves. So it's got this nice, lush, bright, stringy vibe to it. And so for that, I'm going to start using Ableton Live's wavetable and set our oscillator to sawtooth. If you're not using Ableton Live and you're following along with this video, any 2 or more oscillator synth you have will be just fine. So here is our wavetable, oscillator 1 set to sawtooth and 12 semitones higher. So we're going to go a whole octave higher. So it's got that buzzy type of sound. And I made sure to go to the amp envelope and just slope up the attack a little bit and bring out the release. Then what we're going to do is for oscillator 2, we're going to also choose a sawtooth, but this will be the regular octave. So oscillator 1, a whole octave higher. Oscillator 2 stays at the normal octave. And we're just going to slightly detune this a little bit. Give a little bit of filter drive here. So maybe just a dB or so. And the widening magic really happens when you apply unison to these chords. So let's go over here to the unison. We're going to go over to shimmer. Any type of unison mode you have on your synth will do just fine. Now let's warm up these pads by just bringing the frequency cutoff down. Now you'd notice that I have this wavetable on an instrument rack. Well, what I've done is I've just simply hit Command G and that will group the wavetable and create an instrument track instantaneously. And all I'm doing is just duplicating that same first wavetable here onto another instrument rack here. And this is a whole octave higher. So I've used the pitch plugin here in the MIDI effects and just raised that a whole octave higher. So this will be octave, and this is a normal here. We'll give this another color so it's easy to identify. So this I swept all the lows away so we can just focus in on the higher end register. And I've added more voices to the octave one with the same unison, so it just gets a little bit more spread out. And so with the both of them together, we have. So technically, by creating an instrument rack and layering it with 2 wavetables, we're essentially using a 4 oscillator synth. So you can duplicate, add more and more, and so you kind of get the idea. All right, now for the main riff that we can hear going on throughout the chorus, I actually decided to use Arteria's Juno for this. So let me go ahead, open that up, and I'll walk you through recreating the type of sound. So let's go with the new preset. And let me play you the actual part. So what we're looking for is what? More release, more tail. So let's focus our attention on our amp envelope section here, right? That's going to control the overall body. So let's raise the attack a little bit and definitely extend the release. And then what we want to do is then bring the cutoff frequency down a bit so that's not so harsh. A little bit of resonance here. Some high pass filter. A little bit of noise. And a little bit of the sub frequency. So we'll turn that on. Now I'm going to increase a little bit of the impact that the envelope is going to have on the filter. Now I'd like to create a little bit of movement, so that's just not a stale type of sound here. So in order to do that, let's send a little bit of the LFO, and this is where we manage that LFO here. So we're going to lower the rate significantly. That's good. Now let's add the Juno chorus. So we'll just enable this over here. And if we hit the advanced tab on the top, we can send a little bit of the onboard delay. That's here. We'll extend the stereo. And send a lot of reverb to this because that's going to create a lot of that space. Now here's a great way to create some nice space and dimension by just duplicating one instrument and just over-exaggerating the amount of reverb that's using that, tweaking that instrument a little bit, but then using that instrument as a way to kind of just blend and balance that effect and that space with the rest of the track. So we'll take this Juno riff that we just did. We'll hit Command D to duplicate that. And there is the double here. Let's solo this. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, we'll bring the reverb down. We'll leave the delay there. I'm going to hit the unison mode here. That's going to give more voicings to this. And just slightly tweak the LFO a little bit. Just a little difference there. And then what we'll do is we'll head over to the reverb here. I'm going to go to the hybrid reverb and place that directly on here. And I want to really just have this really drenched in this reverb. So I'm treating this almost as a way to, as if I was sending it to an auxiliary return track, but I'm just going to have it side by side here. And what we'll do is use a utility plugin directly after that. And I'm going to set the width. Let's increase the width. I want to really just make this wide, and it's going to give some more depth to the overall track. We can also try getting the pitch plugin, putting that right before this and hitting -12, bringing a whole octave lower, and see what that sounds like. So I'll just tug it down and blend it within the context of the mix. And then as I listen to the reference closely, I can hear a muted guitar going on. So I decided to just go ahead and track myself playing a guitar. And so here's the riff here. Just got a little bit of EQing on that to take away some of the low mids, adding some overdrive, some bit of compression. And I'm using this shifter plugin, just a little pinch of that to kind of widen up the guitar. So I'll highlight all this and hold this off, and this is the guitar just dry. And now I'd like to create a little bit more accent at the very beginning of this chorus section. We can do that by adding some white noise effects. And so I'm going to do that using Ableton Live's analog. So I'll just click, drag and drop the analog right onto the session, and we'll just highlight a specific region, hit Command-Shift-M to create a region there, and just draw in a note. Now what we're going to do is turn our oscillator 2 off, leave oscillator 1 on, but instead of the sawtooth that is set by default, go over here to this random, which will be noise. So what we need to do is into the amp envelope, actually shape it. So let's give it a little bit more release, a little bit more sustain, and maybe just a little less of that attack. So then we can set this to high pass on the filter, and what's cool is then you can start to automate. And so let me do a little automation there. I'll hit show automation. And maybe a little bit more release. So then I'll send this to the room reverb, a little bit of delay that I have in return track A, and see what that does to kind of give a nice introduction to this section. And last but not least, let's go ahead and use Beat Academy's Orbit. It's a plugin that I created. It's an instrument that is VST3 and audio unit compatible and is yours absolutely free. Just click the link below in the description box or visit beatacademy.com/orbit to download this. I've loved using this plugin on my current projects. So I'm simply going to drag and drop the wavetable pads, put that right into the Orbit track, and just play. Cool. And then just duplicate that. I'll put that right alongside the pads, and that should fill up really nicely there. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you were able to pick up a tip or two that you can use in your workflow. And as my gift to you for watching, I'd love to send you Orbit, my first exclusive VST instrument that you can use in your projects absolutely free. Just visit beatacademy.com/orbit or click the link below in the description box. Be sure to like and subscribe to this video so that you can stay up to date with upcoming music production tutorials that I'll be sharing on this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.